everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Board with Each Other, the board gaming podcast that takes board games and reviews them through the lens of playing them as a pair. Whether that's with your significant other, your BFF, or that rival industrial revolution mogul who somehow time-travelled to the present day and you just need to show him who's boss. I'm Al Simpson, your host, and I'm joined as ever by my lovely wife and player 2, Hannah Kelly.
Hi guys.
And today we are doing a minor board game by the name of Brass Birmingham. I'm not intimidated, you're intimidated. Brass Birmingham is a modern day board gaming monolith. It holds the coveted #1 spot on the Boardgame Geek rankings, for those of you who care about such a thing.
And has done for quite some time.
Yeah, a couple of years now.
Yeah.
It knocked Gloomhaven off the top spot a couple of years back. So before I get into the rules and how the game plays, I just want to add the caveat that this Brass Birmingham is a deep, heavy game, and I don't want to sit here for 20 minutes boring the pants of everybody talking all through all the rules. So this will be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, so I will gloss over certain things. I just want to sort of give a flavour of how the game plays. So in Brass Birmingham, you take on the role of an industrial revolution entrepreneur, magnate, whatever the term you want to use, who all have real histories, by the way, and are all real people. You can read up in the rule book if you're that way inclined. And the game is played on a board representing the Midlands in the Industrial Revolution. And how gameplay works is you each have a hand of 8 cards, and you have a number of actions you can take. You also have a player board upon which are stacked tiles that represent different industries, so coal, iron, beer, factories, manufactured goods, pottery. I think that's most of them. And on your turn, any action you undertake in the game requires you to spend a card. So you can either... The cards are split into location cards, which will have locations in the Midlands on them, or industry cards. You can spend a location card to build any industry on one of the slots in that location, or you can spend an industry card to build a industry on a location that is within your network. More on that later. So that's the build action. You can drop a card to build a... I can't remember what they're called. They're transportation link, or a link, let's call them. I can't remember the actual term at the top of my head. And the game is played in 2 eras. In the first era, it's canals, so canal boats, so your transport links. In the second era is railways, so you build railways between the locations. And when you build a railway from one location to another, first of all, you need to have something down in the location you're going from, and then they've all got paths leading to the other ones, and then you can place one on there. That location and the link are counted as your network. If you build something else in one of the locations you've linked to, that also becomes part of your network. That's important because there are several resources in the game. There's coal, there's iron, and there's beer. You can use coal, iron, or beer from either your own tiles that you put down or other people's tiles if they are within your network. There are certain areas on the board where you can sell your goods, but also link to them to obtain coal from the market. If you don't have any and you're not linked to your opponent, or they have none, you can buy coal from the market. Iron you can buy from the market at any time. You don't need to be linked to it. When you put down a tile that has resources on it, either coal or iron, beer doesn't work like that, there are basic little spaces on the board that represent the marketplace. If any of those are empty, those cubes go straight from that location straight into the market, and you get paid out for them. The third action you can take is taking a loan. Money is quite scarce at the start of the game, and you need to sort of build up your industry and build up your control of the board before you start getting income at the start of every turn. There's an income track that goes up slowly as you either empty your reserves of coal or iron, or you sell goods. When you take a loan, you basically... And that income track represents how much money you get at the start of every turn, every round. You can take a loan, which puts you down on the income track, but gives you £30, which is quite a lot in early 19th century money. So a lot of the loan stuff is sort of strategically knowing when to take a hit on your income to try and get your industries going. You can place a card down and spend some iron to develop, which is basically sort of researching. So all of the industries that you have, all the tiles on your board are separated into levels. Most of them sort of 1 through 5, but some of them, like manufactured goods, have more than that. And you can basically use that action to discard tiles from your player board without putting them down to basically make the ones that you do put down better.
Yeah, because if you go to level 2, 3, 4, they are more often than not worth more victory points.
Yeah, more often than not. Not always. Some of them have different quirks. What's also really important about that is when you progress from the Canal era, to the first sort of half of the game, to the second, anything that's level 2 or above stays on the map. Anything that's level 1 basically gets wiped.
Yeah. And you can't develop all cards in the second era. So some you have to develop in the first or play in the first.
Play in the first. Pottery. You can always develop. There's some cards you can't play in the second era, but you can still develop them. Pottery is the exception, where there's certain sort of red lines where you have to have built it in order to continue onwards. The other action you can take is called scouting, where you discard 2 cards and you take 2 wild cards, so a wild location and a wild industry. And each turn, on your turn, you have 2 actions to play.
And you can sell.
Yes, and you can sell. So at the start of the game, there are several selling locations, the number of which depends on the number of players. And they have randomized tiles that tell you what items you can sell there. Mm-hmm. To sell items, you almost always need access to beer. Beer starts at those locations, so you can use the beer that gets replenished at the start of each, either the canal or the rail era. You can use that beer, usually to get a bonus as well when you first sell your goods there. However, that beer runs out, and then you need to be producing beer on your own. When you sell goods, you flip them over, and they'll usually give you a quantity of income. So you go up on the income track, and they'll be worth victory points at the end of the era. You basically do a full scoring at the end of the canal era and the end of the rail era. You also get victory points at the end of each era, depending on how many transport links you have. So each industry tile has a number of little transport icons on it, and you basically count how many of those each of your boats or rails are connected to. Play continues until the deck runs out, at which point you end the era. So when the deck first runs out in the canal era, you then move the score, and then you go over to the railway.
So it's not when the deck runs out, but when the cards in your hand run out.
Beg your pardon, when your cards in your hand, yeah. So once everybody's played all their cards. In the Canal era, the deck has 2 less cards, because you take 2 off right at the start and put them face down. Nobody knows what they are, but they're basically missing. And in the Canal era, you can only build buildings, you can only build 1 building per location. Whereas in the railway era, you can completely take over location if you wish to.
So, for example, Birmingham has 4 slots with different manufactured goods.
Yeah.
You could, in theory, just colonise the entirety of the West Birmingham, but you couldn't do that in the first era.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I'll leave it there rules-wise. There obviously is a lot more to this.
Yeah.
This is heavy, really, really heavy as far as games go. But that should give you a little bit of a flavour of how it plays. The other intricacies of it, I think, we'll get onto with our review
as we come through to the review.
How long does it play? I would say an hour and a half to 2 hours. Is pretty standard, I think, for us.
Yeah, I would say that, and I don't think games get any shorter because you've still got a deck to work through.
Yeah, I mean, games almost sound like I don't think you'd ever get through this in less than sort of an hour and 20. And it's a thinky game, so there will be pauses while people try and think and plan and what have you. It's not simultaneous either, so add players, you're going to increase the runtime. I can see this for 4 players easily going sort of 2.5, 3 hours.
Full evenings game,
So I mean, I don't think we need to talk about why you picked this up. It's incredibly famous. It's number 1 on Boardgame Geek. Like, well, we've got to try this out. Yep. So we did. So shall we crack straight into scoring then?
Yeah, absolutely.
This big one.
All right, so as always, we've got our general scoring criteria before we then move on to the 2-player rating. And under the first, under general, is components. So thinking about board space, setup, that sort of thing. So it's not my most loved game to set up.
No, let's address the massive setup element of the elephant of the room straight away, shall we?
So Al said you've got your own player mat, and on that player mat you've got space for all your industry tiles, and you get evolutions of each of those industry tiles. So boxes, for example, manufactured goods, I think there's about like 12 of them, and each of them have multiple tiles on that slot.
Yeah, most of them do anyway. Yeah.
So these are all individual tiles that you have to count out and put on the right slot.
Yeah.
And then you have this board that's stacked with loads of tiles, and it takes forever.
Yeah, it does take a long time, and there's no way through that. The only way through it I've seen is some people who bought inserts that basically replicate the player boards. So you just take them out and you just have your stacks and you put them on. That is the only way you could speed this up.
Yeah.
Aside from that, you just got to do it the old-fashioned way and go, oh, that's a number 2 box, that goes on the number 2 box slot, repeat ad nauseum. The rest of the game is fairly easy and quick to set up. It's just the player board element takes quite a while.
Yeah. But that said, again, I've got used to it. But
Yeah.
are there some nights where I look at it and go, I can't be faffed with that?
Yeah, definitely. There have been nights where I'm like, I just can't be bothered with the setup, really.
Yeah. Which is unusual, I would say. That's probably the only game, even Gloomhaven, for all its massive moving parts, you know.
Yeah, it just felt a little bit egregious for some reason.
Yeah.
Like, a little bit less egregious, should I say.
What is really cool is with all your tiles, you also get a player
Icon. Yeah.
And that's two-sided, and one's a man and one's a woman.
Yeah, I do like to undergo this exchange during my games.
Yes, he
I
does.
really enjoy that.
But also, I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
I really like that.
Yeah. 2 characters per icon. In terms of the components themselves, I think it's fine. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but there's nothing that blows me away either.
No, I do really like the artwork, though, and although the artwork's not particularly, you know, it's not...
There's no dragons.
There's no dragons, no, and there are no elves. But it really does make me think of the industrial era.
Yeah, no, it has got that proper
even like
feel
the
to it.
industrial cards, location card, like everything has that kind of industrial feel to it. You've also got 2 sides to the board, so you've got Birmingham, well, you've got Midlands at night time, and you've got Midlands during the daytime. Exactly.
Depending on your level of bravery.
So you can flip the board, which I think is quite cute and quite
Yeah,
nice.
same with the player boards as the night side and the day side.
Yeah.
I actually quite like the night side just because it's got this almost gloomy quality to it that I don't see often in board game. I don't know what it is. There's a certain aesthetic to the night side of this that I quite like, whereas the day side's a bit more middling.
Yeah, I mean, it still looks quite grey.
Yeah, it's still got grey. I
misty
mean, it is
and
Britain.
smoggy.
It is the Midlands. So yeah, I mean, everything's fine. I don't think there's anything that sort of wows me. I know a lot of people have upgraded the money tokens to poker chips, and I understand why, because there's a lot of sort of stacking of money and putting stacks of money on the board. So I did mention the rules. The person that spends the most money gets to go first in the next round. So everything you spend during the turn, you got to stack up in front of you and then put it on a pile. And if you've played with decent poker chips, you know there's actually quite a tactile, satisfying element to that.
Clunking down.
There's like that clunk, and I completely 100% understand why people have done that. As they're quite thick, chunky cardboard tokens, but they're not quite the same as poker chips.
The rule book. I have a feeling this is probably not your favourite rule book.
No, it's not bad. It's not bad. I've just again there's some odd placement of things. There's much worse out there. I wouldn't criticise over the rule book.
Enough.
I just find there are a few odd bits and pieces that don't seem to be in the place you'd expect, and because there's a lot of rules minutiae. Sometimes when you're looking something up, it'd just be nice if it was in a bit of a clearer order. It reminds me a little bit of the Nemesis one, but not nearly as bad, where things just seem to be in a really sometimes slightly illogical place and order in the rule book. But for the most part, the rules themselves are really well written and really clear. They're dense and it'll take a while, but they are well put together.
What I would also say is that okay, so it does take up a lot of space from the table. However, I've seen worse table hogs from games that are less.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't think for what it is, I don't think this is a table hog.
No, I don't think what it is. I mean, you obviously got quite a large map of the Midlands, which you need to have in order to be able to, see and navigate your way around. But actually,
it doesn't take up much more room. It doesn't take up much more room than Dune Imperium.
No,
which I think is quite impressive considering how heavy a game it is. Because everything's sort of located on that board or your player map. There's you don't need any other sort of extraneous space. Saying that, if you had 4 people around the table playing this, you would need quite a lot of room.
Yeah, just because your player maps.
Your player boards are quite large.
Yeah.
So, worth saying. So overall, I mean, what did you score this?
So I scored it 7.
Same, yeah, just so. Doesn't set the world on fire components wise, and the setup is a bugbear.
Yeah.
Tear down a lot quicker, obviously.
Yeah. And what's so lovely is that as you score it, you just
you can just you tear down while you're packing away
as you score it.
Yeah, but I went for 7 on this.
Yeah.
Okay.
So under our next category, we have complexity. So that includes things like how much we argue about the rules, analysis paralysis, and always it's not how complex a game is, but how well that complexity serves the gameplay.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to kick us off for this one?
Yeah, so I would say that there are still elements of the rules that I don't quite get and I fall afoul of. And I don't think that's about the rules or how they've been explained to me. I just think it's one extra thing that I have to think about. So the example of this is around the concept of networks and what counts as your network, what doesn't count as your network, and the use of coal. So the idea is that you can access iron from wherever you are because iron's fairly light, whereas coal is not. It's heavy and you need to be connected to a network to be able to use it. And I often fall foul of that in the second era, because I'm not necessarily connected to anything and I'm trying to build stuff that requires coal and go, oh shit, I can't because I've not any coal.
Top tip, you want to have coal when you go into the second era.
Or you want to be able to build coal.
Yeah,
you want to already be within a network. Because again, you get to leave level 2 industries on the board, so that automatically have a network when you start off in the second era.
And why that's so key is you need coal to build railways. You can build canal boats in the first era without any resource, just money. But you actually need resources to build your links, so you can actually get yourself quite stuck quite quickly if you don't have access to it.
Particularly if the coal track is empty and you build coal and it just automatically all just goes
gets eaten by the bank. Yeah, then you're still without coal.
Yeah. So is that one rule too many for me? Does that make it too complex? I don't know, or maybe that's just a me issue. I'm not sure, but I don't particularly struggle with rules, and yet I feel that that's just an extra element that often pushes me over the edge.
Fair enough, okay. I don't think, as a core concept, this is heavier than some of the other things we play. I actually think it's a little bit lighter. I think where the complexity in this game lies is the consistent planning you need to do at every single step. Because if you don't have a plan, and your opponent does, you're going to get left behind very, very quickly.
Really? So I would say the opposite, actually.
But you have to be reactive.
Yeah, so I think you can pivot fairly easily in this.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes you can pivot, sometimes you can't. I think I'll probably loop back to that more in sort of the competitiveness and fun aspects. But in terms of the complexity, I think it is a exceptionally well-oiled machine. I think the rules are just as dense as they need to be. I think if you took things out, you would lose something. I think this is one of those cases where, yes, this is a heavy game, and yes, you will get rules wrong, and you will struggle to get your head around concepts sometimes. But again, I think that's just a learning curve issue.
What's really interesting, though, is you talk... So, for those of you that listened to us before, I often quite struggle with analysis paralysis. I really struggle with trying to make the most optimum move and sort of like, try and calculate it out. And yet I don't have that with this. So you talking about it being quite strategic and, the complexity coming from trying to plan stuff out, I don't necessarily feel... Maybe that's because that lends more to what it is that I do anyway, perhaps.
Perhaps. I just think your brain works better with this one. Because, full disclosure, Hannah is so much better at this than me. I
wouldn't say so much better.
You've won the vast majority of our games.
Yeah, but you're getting closer.
No, I'm not. But thanks for trying to make me feel better. You are better at this than I am. Absolutely. And I don't know if that's because I find it more... Because this is a very, very reactive game. You are constantly bouncing off what your opponent is doing, what the cards come up as, or even what the setup is. And maybe you are just better at pivoting to other things. I think I have a weakness in this game to get too wrapped up in a grand plan and not being able to deviate from it, and I think that's where I fall down flat on my face a lot of the time.
I also think that sometimes you approach board games as they're a problem to solve, And I don't think you can solve this problem.
No, there's too many variables. There's too much going on. But it's that level of too much going on which makes me really rate this on the complexity scale, like really, really high, because I think you could teach this to anybody who plays medium to heavy board games. They could learn this. This is not like absolutely out of the realms of, study it, etc., etc. But to master this will take a lot of practice and a lot of experience. To be able to have a number of strategies in your back pocket that you can pull out depending on what's going on will take a lot of time and a lot of gameplay.
And maybe that's why I always struggle with the whole network thing and the iron thing, because it really hits, and it's a very, very key time point, a very small window of the gameplay. And by which point I'm off thinking about other things. And
and usually do better than me, so it matters less anyway. But, but yeah, I've given this a 9, because I think out of a lot of games, this one's complexity, I think, it's not absolutely perfect, but it's getting there.
And what I would also say is that there's been a really strong upward trend in our scoring as well. So we do tend to score better each time.
We get better at the game. Yeah. We have seen ourselves get better at the game every time we play it, which is great. So yeah, I've given this a 9.
So I gave it an 8 because I thought, again, it's probably a me problem more than anything else. But I think it is a complex game, and there's enough meat to it. I think that that keeps it engaging.
Moving on to the next.
Yeah, point. So on that note, shelf life that includes things like value for money and replayability. So let's start off by, what does it retail as?
60.
60.
Yeah.
That's a lot of game for a decent price point, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, this is a funny one. £60 for what comes in that box is actually on the quite expensive side, in my opinion. However, the stature of this game and it being number 1 on Boardgame Geek means they can just keep selling this at perpetually full price. I've never seen this on like special offer anywhere or anything. They've got 60 quid. That's it. That's what you pay to play. I mean, it's not excessively expensive, but I have seen more for that price point before.
So I suppose then my comment is around the replayability aspect of it.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I think that makes this game so interesting is there's a level of randomisation that keeps it quite fresh.
But very light. Very small amount of randomisation.
So mainly what we're talking about is
what you can sell,
what you can sell and where you can sell it. Aside from that, it's just luck about what you pull in terms of your cards. And bearing in mind, you can always trade your cards in order to get wild locations.
The luck mitigation's through the roof.
You can mitigate your luck. But that makes for actually quite different games. Yeah. So we had a game recently where we could only sell 2 items.
Yeah, because some of those tiles that you draw are blank, which means you can't sell anything there. So we ended up in a game where you could only sell 2 out of the 4 different industries. Yeah,
and that made for such a different game experience than when you can sell at every location and every depot, and you can sell like a full range of items. It also changed your strategy quite a lot, because actually there might be no point in building boxes.
Yeah, if you can't sell them.
Or manufactured goods, should I say.
Boxes, as we call
sell boxes, because they're not on the map. So it does make for a very different play experience.
Absolutely, yeah. And I don't feel like any of the games that we have had at this have been anywhere near like.
No.
There's been a completely different experience every single time. And while you get better, the concepts, the actual scenario almost that you're dealing with shifts so much. And so much of this is dependent on your opponent's behaviour. So what they do has to dictate what you do, and you're constantly... we'll often have turns where we both do the same thing right at the start, but then we quickly go off on completely different paths a lot of the time. Which means the replayability for me is through the roof. It's really, really high. I think as a concept, with that sort of small amount of randomisation and the depth to it, you could play this forever.
Yeah.
Would you want to? I think is the different thing. Is there enough there to keep you endlessly interested in it? And that's more the question for me.
So one of the things that we've not talked about is that this can be played at 2, or obviously more than 2. But when you play it at 2, there is the entire north section of the Midlands, which is not accessible
via cards
unless you use wild locations
or link to it and use industry cards. That's the other way you can do it.
And I guess that's a balancing act, so it's to kind of make you...
It's to force people up against each other, so they're just the opposite ends of the map.
And as a result, we have, I don't think, ever gone...
I did in our last game.
Did you?
Yeah, I built something in our last game
up there. You went north of the walls,
yeah, because I was just trying to become the beer baron of the Midlands. And,
it didn't work for him.
No, it didn't work for me, but I was trying to build more beer than I could build in the map as it stood, so, yeah.
So I guess that's the other thing that we've never even explored that. We've just stuck to our original size map.
Which you have to in a two-player game,
yeah. But again, I think we'll probably come back to that in the two-player rating.
But yeah, I mean...
What I would say is that I haven't... You talk about needing to pivot, for example. I have never found myself feeling boxed in. I'm going to compare this to June, for example.
Sure.
So sometimes, particularly the base game of June, I would feel that I just got really unlucky with card draws and what was in the marketplace and what I could buy. And sometimes I lost games because of that.
And
I didn't necessarily play to my strengths. Whereas I've never felt that element of being boxed in with this. I've always felt that there are options open to me. I can always pivot and turn. And I think that's also what keeps that replayability for me as well.
Yeah.
Like, I never feel like I'm going to get trapped and therefore I'm just going to lose a game because I've got unlucky.
You're going to be out halfway through a very long game. Yeah. No, I would agree to that to a certain extent. I've lent too heavily into things before and realised 3/4 through the game that I am absolutely up shit creek without a paddle. But that's, again, choices that I've made. And I think when you play this, there has to be an element of flexibility to your strategy. And I think that's why I fall down sometimes. Think, I've got it. I know what I'm doing. And then I just won't deviate enough from it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think obviously mileage may vary depending on how engaging you find it, but as a core concept, there's so much depth to this that you could play it for forever. And I've given it an 8 as a result.
Yeah, I also gave it an 8.
Okay.
So then our final category under general is fun. So do you have any fun when you play it?
Yeah. Yes is the short answer. I love Brass. It's very, very good.
My answer was yes and... and I think we're probably going to come on to more of that in our two-player rating stuff. So I might kind of just pause on that and we'll come back to it later. Okay. But yes, I do love it and I do really enjoy playing it. And there are other games of this ilk.
Medium to heavy Euros, basically.
Yeah, that I would probably pull out before it.
Yeah, which is really interesting.
It is really interesting, isn't
the
it?
same.
And I don't know why that is, because there is some stuff that we'll hit on the two-player rating, but even then I don't think that fully explains it for me.
Yeah, I've been trying to articulate why it is that... And I just to start out, I do really enjoy this.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. I think it tickles my grey matter in a really satisfying way. But I think one of the things that I find quite difficult about it, and I think maybe dampens a little bit of the fun for me, is while there's a huge range of strategy and a huge amount of depth, I sometimes feel almost shoved down a path. I don't know how else to explain it. Sort of the actions that I'm taking. There's almost a optimization thing, which I find to its detriment, where you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. That's what my brain's saying all the time.
I don't get that.
I get that all the time with this, and it saps a little bit out of the fun for me, because I feel like if I don't do this, I'm making a massive mistake, and therefore I'm going to lose. And I don't know why this does that to me, because I don't think I've ever encountered any other game that does that precisely. But it makes me constantly second-guess my decisions and constantly feel like
analysis paralysis.
My own brain is pushing me down a particular path, whether I think that's the fun option or not. And I feel like sometimes maybe that's what I'm trying to articulate. Maybe I feel like it's so intense in terms of my brain strategically that I kind of forget to have fun. And that's a really odd one, because I don't think I've ever found a game that does that to me.
What's really interesting is that you do quite like fucking with me.
I do, yes.
So when there is an opportunity on the board to fuck my shit up, you will do that. Even if that doesn't necessarily result in a win for you, you will do it just to fuck me over.
Yeah, I'm just a petty bastard.
And you are. It's less easy to do in the first era. It's much easier to do in the second era.
Yeah.
But actually, you don't do it all that much.
No, because I'm too scared. I'm too scared of going off down a rabbit hole that's then going to lose me the game. And I think it's that almost... fear is too strong a word for it, but that constant second guessing of, am I doing the optimal move that this game seems to breed in my brain, that saps a little bit of fun out of it for me.
Isn't that so weird? Like, I'm the one that has AP, and yet I don't have it with this, but yet you do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have AP where I'll sit there prevaricating over my moves, but I feel like my brain's constantly beating itself up all the time, and... I think that's the easiest way I can articulate it, because there is something in this that makes it less fun for me than an Arc Nova or Terra Mystica, for example, or June. I know June's a bit lighter, but I have so much. I have not so much more. That's an exaggeration, but I have more fun playing those games compared to this, because I think my brain doesn't beat itself up, and I don't feel like everything I do needs to be optimal all the time.
And what I would say as well is that resources, beer can be a finite resource, but aside from that, other resources generally, you don't have an issue with that. However, your turns are really limiting. So there is definitely a point where you're like, yeah, and then like, oh shit, cards are running out. I've got to nail this down.
Yeah, what am I doing here?
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that feeds into it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, when things do go how you planned them and you do execute what it is that you've pivoted to during the game, it's immensely satisfying. It's very, very rewarding.
Yeah.
It's great.
And it is a fun game.
But if you're like, if anything I've said resonates with you, you might not have as much fun as you expect. And
So how did you score it then?
I really wrestled over a 7 or an 8 for this.
Really? So what?
Yeah, I'm 7 or an 8. And it feels very harsh, but I'm probably going to go 7, because I think that's the honest answer for me.
So, funnily enough, I wrestled over a 6 and a 7.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Lower than me? Okay.
Yeah. And I eventually settled on a 6, but I mean, 6.5 is probably where I would put it if I could.
Yeah, okay.
But I don't know if we're allowed to do that.
No, you can't do half score.
No,
It's just
okay,
the level of complexity
so I went
too
for a
high.
6. And again, we'll probably come on to some of that stuff in like the 2-player category.
Okay. So before we finish this, I think I have to ask the question, because this is the number one ranked board game in the world in the IMDb of board games.
Oh, mate.
Is Brass Birmingham overrated?
We haven't...
I think this is a general point, because I think the two-player debate is to come, and I think that's a slightly different thing. Is Brass Birmingham as a board game overrated?
No.
I'm going to say yes.
Really?
I looked down the top 10 on Boardgame Geek, and out of all the ones I've played, I prefer them quite significantly to this. Arc Nova, June Imperium, Gloomhaven, Pandemic, Legacy Season 1, Spirit Island. I prefer all of them to this. Quite substantially.
Right, but I think we're gonna start teasing some of this stuff out when we come to the 2-player.
Okay. Well, let's total up those scores then. So that gives us a general score of 7.5. Ooh, as always, we round, so that's an 8.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't come for us, Pitchfork crew. Brass Birmingham's an 8. Very good game.
So after that somewhat contentious score, we move on to our 2-player...
It's not a 10, how dare you! Come at me, Internet.
We'll move on to our 2-player ratings. What I'm also going to say before I start this is that a lot of these, for me, bleed into each other, and so we will try to talk them under...
Try and keep it to topics, but okay.
Topic, but I think probably I'm going to start bleeding.
Don't start bleeding, it's just a podcast. God.
So under our first category, we have table talk, and that includes things like getting to know you.
And interaction, I think, increasingly for me, player interaction. Which I think is a big one with this, is that interaction point, because everything you do, as we've said in this, is very dependent on your co-player. Your co-player? What? That's not a thing. Your opponent's actions. Co-player.
That's why you lose.
Yeah, it's not a co-op, Al. I just want to make Birmingham better.
Right,
no shade on Birmingham. Birmingham's great.
With a bit more enthusiasm this time, please.
I had my stag do in Birmingham. There's memories.
I lived in Birmingham for years.
Yes. So yeah, the interaction on this gameplay wise is through the roof. Whether that actually makes you talk to each other is a slightly different matter. It is quite a silent, thinky game. Mm-hmm. I mean, you saying what you're doing, but yeah, there's not an awful amount of actual sort of table talk. You know, but the interaction is very, very high.
Yeah.
So, you know.
So you're constantly feeding off what your opponent does.
How many names for an opponent can we come up with in one episode? The other person?
But I think, for me, the lack of, banter and the lack of trash talking seems a missed opportunity.
There's just too much thinking involved to even have space for that. I think that's the thing there.
And I always feel that's just like a little bit of a disappointment for me. That you are fighting head to head and you are competing for resources and spaces and stuff, and you can fuck each other's turn up, and yet it feels a bit lacking.
Yeah, I guess, and I don't know what it is that I wanted to do. I think maybe for me, there's just a lack of gotcha to it, to a certain extent. You never feel like you've done something like, haha, look at what I've done, or
that's because you don't do that.
No.
And you don't know that I've done it until it's too late.
Yeah, potentially, but
two turns later.
I never feel like in that moment there's that element of, oh, how dare you, oh, damn it, that sometimes you get in competitive games. Just for some reason is not there. I
also think there is, because you obviously you have resources on the board, so if you need, for example, iron or you need coal, you will use your opponents, which can sometimes then lead them to scoring that tile, for example, and getting victory points out of it. So also kind of, it's the opposite, like you can help them win a little bit while serving your own ends.
Yeah.
So maybe that also kind of plays into it as well.
Which is an interesting one. I found this one really difficult to score, and I did the classic fence-sitting thing, and I'm giving it a 5, because I think the table talk is severely lacking, but the interaction from player to player is right up there. And again, is it getting to know you absolutely terrible, but if it's somebody you know very well, it's nice to test your brain against them in that sense, and the interaction's high. So yeah, I've gone for the middle ground, giving it a 5.
So I scored it a 7.
Okay.
Because I think we do talk all the time as we play this, and I do think
maybe I just don't remember it because I'm thinking too hard.
Yeah, maybe. And I think you are constantly having to react and adjust to what your opponent is doing, and the amount of pivoting that you have to do as a result, particularly in the early, the first era. Because if they've taken that slot that you were desperately after, you have to really quite think on your feet about how to do that. However, it would have been higher if there was more trash talk. And that sounds bad, doesn't it? I
don't think it's about trash talk. I think what you mean is about that moment where you feel like you've got one over on your opponent.
Yeah.
And I just don't get many moments like that in this. And that promotes that interaction, doesn't it?
Okay, so then our next category, competitiveness.
Yeah, so this is completely the opposite end of the scale for me. I think the unbelievable depth of this game and everything you do is your own choice. There is a huge amount of luck mitigation. The better player will win.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's true. You are better at this than me, and you win because you are. And it's right up there for me in terms of competitiveness. It is a very, very, very competitive game, in my opinion.
Yep.
I feel like there's a but coming.
Yep. So there are a lot of people, I think, I don't know, I think there are a lot of people that say that Brass Birmingham isn't playable at 2 because of the restrictions on the board and because you don't necessarily have the same level of... It's the tuning experience again, because you've got more options open to you, so it's not so competitive in terms of resources or spaces, etc.
I don't think that's necessarily true, too. I don't agree. I mean, we'll get onto something in the next...
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's all kind of like bleeds into one another for me again. So I suppose there is that element, and we'll talk about that when we come to the FOMO category, or scalability category. But then I think on the flip side of that, compared to other games that we've played where it's more complicated or it's more difficult to work out who's actually winning, it's a bit more... I find it easy to work out what your strategy is, and I can kind of work out from the board state who is winning, and therefore I can intercept those plans.
So you find it easier to read, basically?
Yeah, so I find it easy to read, and therefore I think that pushes the competitiveness up for me.
Yeah.
Do I think it would be better with more? But well, we'll come back to
Yeah.
that.
But just as a sort of core game, like, do you feel super engaged to win and very satisfied when you do win? Because I think that's what it always comes down to in competitiveness for me. Like, there's always two sides to it for me. How much control you have over winning. And how satisfying it feels to win.
Yeah. It's never as nail-biting as June.
No. I never feel that tension there. Because
you haven't got this constant counter about who's winning. It's a bit more sort of vague. But I do still feel that element of I'm impacting your gameplay and I'm doing these things to have that,
that effect on what you're doing. Yeah.
And more control over, and that control. So, no, absolutely, I do think it's very competitive.
Yes. Well, I would agree. It's a very, very, very roundabout route to say we both think it's a very competitive game. And I think, like we alluded to in some of the previous categories, it's the depth to it. Like, I think this is like ocean deep. Like, there's so far you could go with this.
And I've not won the game for the same reason twice.
No, you haven't.
So once I won because of my network.
Yeah.
Once I won because I'd evolved my factories to the nth level. So each game.
Yeah, there's a lot of routes to victory, but it's just which one you pivot to at the right time more than anything else, and what your opponent's doing in comparison to that. So I've given this a 9 because I think it is absolutely right up there in terms of competitive experiences.
So 8 for me.
Yeah, okay. All right, so this I think is going to be quite a big one. Scalability and FOMO.
Yeah.
So would this work better with more people? How feasible is it as a 2-player game? Go on, because I think you have quite a lot to say here.
So, I mean, there is just an entire section of the map that we've never played with because we restrict ourselves. But I think also what's quite interesting, quite telling, we don't feel that we need to go there because we have that competitive experience in that strict or shrunken...
Yeah, I think the 2-player experience in that sense is quite well designed. I think it shrinks it enough.
What I would also say is that actually you strip out areas as well if you're playing at 3.
You do, yes.
So your actual deck of cards will change depending on your number of players to make things more available or not. So that's obviously
it's only it's only the full thing with 4.
Yeah.
But I mean, this 100% would be better with additional people. There's no bones about it in my mind. I think having, even though you've got more space, having the extra person also doing things and that balance between who to not who to go after, but who to try and compete against, depending on what they're doing, I think would shift all the time. And this has obviously been designed to be played at 4 players.
Yeah.
Like it's really, really apparent, and I imagine it would be an incredible experience at 4 players.
And I think a lot of your complaints about, strategy would become very quickly less pertinent because actually you've got so much less options.
Yeah,
in some ways.
I guess it's not just about that. I think it's like playing one person 1v1 and playing optimally versus the group of 4 people who might all be playing in quite different ways. I think it would make it a much more interesting endeavour.
Yeah.
And I think I just have more fun with it.
Yeah.
With more people around the table.
And things would open up a lot quicker as well because your networks, because it's also not just about your network, because once you're connected via canal boats or, trains or whatever, you can start using other people's lines, so actually the whole map will begin to expand and gives you so many more possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think is quite exciting, actually.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely.
I've never had that experience. I want it.
Yeah, no, I would love to play this with more people. I think I've come across quite a few times where we've had games that people are like, oh, it's not very good at 2, by people, the internet discourse. This is probably the first one that I actually quite agree with the discourse. I'm like, yeah, I get it. I see why this should be played at 3+, at the very least.
And I think then all those other things that we've talked about under the 2-player rating scale, so I think it would be more competitive.
Yeah.
I think you would get more table talk, potentially, and a bit more,
I think it would go, everything else would go up. Yeah.
I think everything else would go up with more players.
Yeah. Saying that, it works perfect. It's not broken.
It's not broken.
Absolutely not broken. And if you are a person that does have access to a gaming group but also plays as a pair, this will be a really good one because you can practice playing it as a pair and then, unleash on the wider group. Because as we've said, it's a game that you 100% get better at the more you play. Mm-hmm. So if you are a person who has a limited access to playing with 3 or 4, but it does still happen occasionally, and they're into that sort of thing, most of the time playing at 2, I would 100% get this.
But the learning curve is steep.
Yeah, the learning curve is steep. And it's one of those things where the learning curve is so steep, if you do have a limited access to a 3 or 4 player pool, like we do. We do have friends that will come around.
We do have friends.
We do have friends. We do have people that play games, but this is a difficult one to pull out because it is so intense in terms of weight. You'd ideally need people who knew how to play it already, or prepared to go away and study a rule book in their own time and come to the game ready to play, because it would take you an entire evening to teach, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you are in that position, I do recommend it, because it is workable at 2. It's not one of those that's going to gather dust at on your shelf just because you don't have a 3rd or 4th person round. But
it is a different... I do think it's a different experience.
A completely different experience, and I've given a 4.
Oh, I gave it a 4 as well.
Okay, well there you go, bang on. So
let's add those scores up.
So that gives us an overall 2-player rating of 6.
Yeah.
Which I think feels about right to me.
No, I think that's about right. And I think I'm also kind of want to go back and caveat, when we talked about fun and the general criteria, I think a lot of this 2-player stuff fed into that for me.
Yeah.
So again, if we had more people around the table, I probably would find it more fun.
Yeah, no, I would agree.
And hence why I don't think it's overrated.
Then the conclusion, you don't think it's overrated.
Yeah, I don't think it's overrated.
I think it's a little bit overrated.
Did Arc Nova come out before or after Brass?
After.
Oh, okay.
Quite a while after, yeah. And
but also, I think Arc Nova's better at 2 than it is at 4, so...
And this has been through several permutations. The original game was called Brass. I can't remember when that came out, but quite a long time ago. And then you had Brass Lancashire.
Oh, yeah, no, you did.
Which apparently is better for 2 than this.
Is it?
From what I've heard, yeah. But it also apparently more punishing, in terms of you make a mistake, you lose.
Oh, okay.
That's what I've heard. I haven't played it. This is the sort of 3rd permutation of it. I'm glad we did that. A little bit intimidating taking on something of that stature, but I hope you enjoyed it if you're listening to us today.
It is a good game. It does work at 2,
is.
And if you are into your heavy games, which you must be, otherwise you wouldn't be listening to this podcast.
Yeah.
Definitely, it's worth a
definitely recommend. I just maybe don't think it's as good as I expected, and maybe that's that classic like top of the ball, top of the heap kind of thing, which sets expectations that can't be met. I do think it has its quibbles and its problems, but overall, a very, very good game. So, thank you for joining us, and until next time, be good to each other, have fun, and play lots of board games.